What if one narrow strip of water, just a few kilometers wide, could choke the global economy overnight? And what if the opening move to break that chokehold wasn't a massive fleet, but a single warship moving in silence? In early 2026, something unusual appeared on satellite feeds. No announcement, no press briefing, just a lone American assault ship cutting across the ocean at high speed. Within days, one of the most critical oil arteries on Earth went dark. This isn't just a military deployment. This is the opening phase of a high-stakes confrontation that could reshape global power. By early 2026, tensions between Iran and the United States had been building quietly, but relentlessly, for months. At the center of it all lies the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. On paper, it's just a shipping lane. In reality, it's one of the most strategically vital choke points on the planet. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows through this passage every single day. Whoever controls or disrupts Hormuz doesn't just influence regional trade. They hold leverage over global energy markets. Iran understands this better than anyone. For years, Tehran has invested heavily in asymmetric warfare capabilities. Instead of competing directly with the overwhelming naval power of the United States, Iran built a different kind of threat: fast attack boats, mobile missile systems, sea mines, and hidden launch platforms embedded along its rugged coastline. These systems are not designed to dominate the ocean. They are designed to deny access. And in 2026, that strategy reached its peak. Following a series of escalating incidents, covert strikes, cyber disruptions, and proxy conflicts across the Middle East, Iran made a calculated move. It didn't declare war. It didn't mobilize a conventional fleet. Instead, it activated its denial network. Commercial vessels began reporting near-miss missile strikes. Several tankers were hit. Others simply disappeared from tracking systems. Insurance companies reacted immediately, suspending coverage for ships entering the region. Within days, traffic through the strait dropped dramatically, from over 100 vessels a day to almost none. This wasn't a blockade in the traditional sense. There were no visible battle lines, no large fleets confronting each other. Instead, it was something far more difficult to counter: a shadow blockade. Missiles launched from concealed positions, drones appearing briefly before vanishing, mines drifting silently beneath the surface. For global shipping companies, the calculation was simple. The risk outweighed the reward, and just like that, the artery of global oil flow began to close. The United States now faced a dilemma: allow the blockade to continue and risk a global economic shock, or intervene and risk direct military escalation with Iran. Washington chose a third option: not an immediate full-scale assault, but a controlled, precision-driven operation designed to reopen the corridor step by step. And at the center of that operation was a ship that wasn't supposed to act like an aircraft carrier. The first sign of escalation didn't come from headlines. It came from satellites. A single vessel, moving fast, steady, and alone, cut across the Pacific. No public mission profile. No official escort formation visible at first. Just a 45,000-ton warship maintaining a consistent speed of nearly 20 knots, heading toward one of the most volatile regions on Earth. That ship was the USS Tripoli. At first glance, it didn't look like the centerpiece of a major operation. It wasn't a nuclear-powered supercarrier. It didn't carry the overwhelming air wing of a traditional strike group. But that's exactly what made it dangerous. Unlike larger carriers that must operate at safer distances, Tripoli was built for proximity, for confined waters, for rapid deployment, and for flexibility. Its design had once been questioned. Critics argued it lacked the firepower of a full carrier. Now, in the narrow waters near the Strait of Hormuz, that limitation became its greatest advantage. As the ship approached the region, its configuration revealed its true purpose. The deck was packed with F-35B stealth fighters, aircraft capable of short takeoff and vertical landing. No need for long runways. No dependence on massive carrier infrastructure. These jets could launch quickly, operate close to the target zone, and return within minutes. Inside the ship, the layout had been optimized, not for amphibious landings, but for sustained air operations. Expanded hangar space, increased fuel reserves, rapid rearming cycles. Tripoli wasn't acting like an amphibious assault ship anymore. It was functioning as a light aircraft carrier, one designed to operate on the edge of danger. But it wasn't alone. As it entered operational range, a compact strike group formed around it. A guided missile cruiser and a destroyer took position nearby, creating a layered defense system. Their radar systems scanned continuously. Vertical launch systems stood ready to intercept incoming threats or strike targets deep inland. This wasn't a show of force. It was a surgical tool, and timing was everything. While larger U.S. carrier groups remained further out at sea, launching aircraft that had limited time over target, Tripoli moved closer, much closer, within 100 to 150 miles of the strait. That distance changed everything. Now, F-35Bs could maintain a near-constant presence over the shipping lanes. One aircraft lifts off vertically. Minutes later, another follows. Then another, a rotating cycle of air dominance. Above the narrow corridor, barely 2 miles wide in some sections, these jets began establishing control of the sky. Below, the situation remained far more complex. Iran's strategy wasn't about holding territory. It was about creating uncertainty. Missile launchers hidden in mountainous terrain, tunnels carved into cliffs, mobile units that could fire and relocate within minutes. You couldn't simply destroy what you couldn't see. And that's where the next phase of the operation began to unfold. Back on Tripoli, it wasn't just jets preparing for deployment. In the lower decks, nearly 2,500 Marines stood ready. Helicopters and MV-22 Ospreys were being prepped, rotors folded, systems checked, crews waiting. This signaled a shift. Air power alone wouldn't be enough. To truly break the blockade, the United States needed to reach into the terrain itself, into the mountains, the hidden launch sites, the underground networks, and that meant one thing: boots on the ground, inserted from the sea. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. The United States possesses overwhelming military superiority, advanced aircraft, precision weapons, global logistics, and unmatched naval power. With assets like the USS Tripoli and F-35B stealth fighters operating near the strait, it would appear that control of the battlefield is only a matter of time. But war, especially modern war, is rarely that simple. Because Iran isn't trying to win in the traditional sense. It's playing a completely different game. Instead of seeking dominance, Iran is focused on disruption. Instead of controlling territory, it aims to control risk. And in the confined geography of the Strait of Hormuz, that strategy becomes incredibly effective. Think about the battlefield. The shipping lanes are narrow, predictable. Commercial vessels have limited room to maneuver. The surrounding coastline is rugged, elevated, and filled with natural cover. For Iran, this is the perfect environment for asymmetric warfare. Missile systems don't need to survive long. They just need to fire once. Fast attack units don't need to win engagements. They just need to create enough uncertainty to halt traffic. Even the possibility of a single successful strike is enough to shut down global shipping. And that's exactly what happened. So while the U.S. controls the airspace, Iran still controls the psychology of the battlefield. That's the first layer of this strategic paradox. The second layer is operational complexity. From the outside, deploying F-35Bs and launching precision strikes seems decisive. But the reality on the ground, or rather beneath it, is far more complicated. Iran's infrastructure isn't fully visible. Many launch systems are mobile or hidden in reinforced underground networks. Destroying them requires not just air power, but intelligence, timing, and often physical presence. This is where the role of the Marines becomes critical. By inserting forces directly into key terrain, mountain ridges, coastal choke points, suspected launch zones, the U.S. can begin to dismantle Iran's denial network piece by piece. But this comes with risk. Unlike high-altitude air operations, ground insertions expose troops to ambush, hidden defenses, and unpredictable engagements. Every landing zone could be compromised. Every ridge could conceal a missile team. In other words, the closer the U.S. gets to solving the problem, the more vulnerable it becomes. And then there's the third layer, time. For the United States, reopening the strait quickly is essential. The longer the disruption continues, the greater the pressure from global markets, allies, and domestic stakeholders. For Iran, time is an advantage. Every additional day of uncertainty drives oil prices higher. Every disrupted shipment amplifies global anxiety. Iran doesn't need to win battles, it just needs to prolong instability. So who is winning? Militarily, the United States is gaining control. Step by step, airspace first, then sea lanes, then coastal threats. Strategically, however, Iran is still achieving its objective. It has already demonstrated that it can disrupt one of the most critical economic arteries in the world, with relatively limited resources. And that changes the equation. Because even if the U.S. reopens the strait, the message has already been sent. The next phase of this conflict will determine whether that message becomes a one-time shock or a permanent shift in global power dynamics. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz doesn't stay in the Strait of Hormuz. Within 48 hours of the disruption, the first cracks began to appear, not on the battlefield, but in global markets. Oil prices surged, not gradually, not predictably, but violently. Traders reacted to uncertainty, not just supply loss, because the real danger wasn't how much oil had already been blocked, it was how long the disruption could last. Markets don't fear shortages, they fear unpredictability, and Hormuz had just become the most unpredictable choke point on Earth. Energy importing nations were hit first. Countries across Asia, especially those heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, began scrambling for alternative supplies. Strategic reserves were discussed, emergency procurement channels activated, but replacing nearly a fifth of global oil flow is not something any system is designed to handle smoothly. Shipping costs skyrocketed. Insurance premiums, in some cases, completely withdrawn. Major maritime companies rerouted vessels or suspended operations entirely. The risk of a single missile strike, just one, was enough to outweigh millions in potential profit. And that's when the second wave hit, supply chain disruption. Because oil isn't just fuel, it's the backbone of transportation, manufacturing, and global trade. As tankers stalled, so did the systems dependent on them. Airlines began adjusting routes and pricing. Logistics companies warned of delays. Manufacturing sectors, already strained from previous global disruptions, faced yet another shock. Then came the political ripple effect. The United States was no longer just dealing with a regional military problem. It was now under pressure from allies. European nations called for stability, but avoided direct military involvement. China, heavily reliant on Gulf energy imports, faced a strategic dilemma. It needed the strait open, but had no interest in supporting U.S. military operations directly. Instead, Beijing pushed for de-escalation while quietly increasing its naval presence in surrounding waters. Russia, on the other hand, saw opportunity. Higher oil prices strengthened its export revenues. At the same time, prolonged instability weakened Western economies. Moscow didn't need to intervene. It simply needed the situation to continue. And Iran? Iran understood exactly what it had triggered. By avoiding full-scale war and operating within the gray zone, it forced the global system into a state of tension without crossing a clear threshold that would justify overwhelming retaliation. This is the essence of modern hybrid conflict. Not total war, but controlled chaos. Not destruction, but disruption at scale. And perhaps most importantly, plausible escalation, because every move now carries risk. If the United States pushes too aggressively, it risks igniting a broader regional war. If it holds back, it risks normalizing the idea that global trade routes can be disrupted without consequence. This is no longer just about reopening a shipping lane. It's about setting a precedent. Who controls the flow of energy? Who enforces stability? And what happens when that stability can no longer be guaranteed? The operation is still unfolding. USS Tripoli continues its rotations. Aircraft rise and fall from its deck in a relentless cycle. Marines remain on standby, waiting for orders that could shift this from a controlled operation into something far more direct. The strait may reopen, convoys may pass, markets may stabilize, but the real question is no longer about this moment. It's about the next one. because Iran has already proven that it doesn't need to defeat the United States to challenge it. It only needs to disrupt the system the world depends on. So now the question is this a temporary crisis or the beginning of a new era where global choke points become permanent pressure points? If you want to understand how this story unfolds next, make sure you're watching closely, because this is far from over.